It never fails. If I bring up a doctrinal stance taught and believed by dispensationalists, or I quote one of their founders or authorities, my inbox is flooded from folks who state that they do not believe that teaching, or they try to distance themselves from the authority quoted. Hello, I'm Jerry Johnson, and I welcome you to another edition of Against the World. Not long after we released one of our best-selling documentaries, The Late Great Planet Church, The Rise of Dispensationalism, I heard from numerous advocates of the system saying that we were painting with a broad brush. I also heard from folks that said we were committing an ad hominem fallacy. Now what I want to do is I want to address the last statement first, and here's my response. Really? If dispensationalists are so embarrassed by what their founders and leading proponents taught that it forces them to shy away in embarrassment from their doctrinal foundations, then why in the world are you calling yourselves dispensationalists at all? To say it another way, if simply documenting the historical record of dispensationalism and hence exposing the ugly pot marks it has left in the road is an ad hominem argument, if that's what you call an ad hominem argument, then who could ever give the history of any movement? Needless to say, I'll wait for your answers. Modern dispensationalists run from their history and founders faster than Jehovah's Witnesses try to distance themselves from Charles Taze Russell and the failed prophecies of the Watchtower. Seriously, friends, every time I get one of these types of emails in my inbox, I can't help but to laugh. Another approach that is often tried by the few but better read dispensationalists is to align themselves with progressive dispensationalism. However, it doesn't take many a question to see rather quickly that this, like progressive dispensationalism itself, is a farce. Why, you ask? Do I call progressive dispensationalism a farce? I'm so glad that you asked that question. Former dispensationalist Keith Matheson, now of Ligonier Ministries, hits the proverbial nail on its head when he explained, quote, progressive dispensationalists have moved closer to Reformed theology on a number of doctrines. They now acknowledge that the kingdom has been inaugurated and that there is a present as well as a future aspect of the kingdom. They have also recognized the two people of God's theory to be unbiblical. If the defining doctrine of dispensationalism is the two people of God's theory, and this is the belief of the distinction between the church and Israel being rejected, then to reject that theory is to reject dispensationalism itself. Progressive dispensationalism, he concludes, is therefore both an encouraging trend and a misleading or confusing title. So why does Matheson come to this conclusion? Well, here it is. Because without the two people of God theory, the church and Israel being distinct, there is no dispensationalism. He goes on to explain that the term itself is both dishonest and disingenuous. In fact, when Charles Ryrie complained that these progressive were dishonest in their employment of the word dispensationalism, while at the same time denying the core of its theology, he was absolutely correct. And I would go so far as to say that this is equal to Mormonism with its queer doctrines claiming to be Christian. Or to state it another way, it's like putting a milk bucket under a bull. So here's my challenge to dispensationalists. Stop running from the founders and authorities of your system, men like J.N. Darby, C.I. Scofield, John Wolverd, and Charles Ryrie. Stop denying the core doctrines while still claiming to hold to the system. And finally, consider the fact that if someone brings up the history of the movement and your only response is the baseless ad hominem charge, maybe it's time to rethink your theological system. Until next week, this is Jerry Johnson, standing contra mundum against the world.